Rabbi.
Welcome back to another week with Rabbi Pinchas Winston. We're not going to go through the whole introduction. Both Yehudis Shamroth and I are both on remote locations, so we're going to just announce the bare minimums over here. First of all, this is sponsored by the Miriam Project Ula Hour, and this is also a project of itstimetolive.com, the Bring Them Home organization. And we want to also remember Rabbi Winston's website, which is 36.org, which you can find all of his books and programming on that website as well. Without further ado, Rabbi Winston.
Okay, thank you. Ben Gurion Airport, right?
Rabbi, I'm at the airport. My daughter-in-law is making aliyah.
Oh,
sorry
nice.
about all the noise.
A double mazel tov. She has a.
Yeah.
I'm going to sign off because.
Okay. When I actually thought about tonight's topic, it didn't occur to me the time that I did that tonight would actually be Tu B'Av, which is a very important day of the year. It was kind of the Shidduch day of the year back in the times of the Gemara. Talmud, and but Kabbalistically also it's very, very important. This week Shabbos Nachmu is the Shabbos of consolation because we just came off of Tisha B'Av, which is pushed off from Shabbos to Sunday, day of mourning. So now we read all the haftarahs that we read for the 3 weeks were to do with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And now this week we're going to read Nachmu, which is about the Navi prophet. People that things get Hashem will never abandon us completely, and we will always survive, and there'll always be an element of us that will survive, and eventually we will see the end of history in a positive way, and Mashiach will come, and the world the way we're looking for, that should be ultimately with peace in the world and everything going the way it's supposed to go. We're anxiously waiting the final redemption, Gula Shema, complete redemption after thousands of years. There have been 4 exiles up until now. Really, if you want to include the one that we're going through right now, they call it a 5th one. 4 that were prophesied in the time, the Torah itself, in the 2nd verse of the Torah. And then later on, it's also told to Abraham, and of course the famous prophecy of Yaakov Avinu with the ladder, with the four ministering angels, one of each one being for a different nation that was going to exile the Jewish people. One, of course, took place in Eretz Israel, which was the Greek exile, but 4 exiles nevertheless. And the 4th predicted exiles came to an end really with World War II. So then, what are we still doing here? Why are we still in exile? Because we're going through the final stages of the preparation. Technically speaking, we should be out of it by now. If we were to get everything right and do things we're supposed to do. The analogy I used last week was about someone sitting in a taxi at his destination and not getting out of the car. That's kind of the Jewish people that, for all intents and purposes, take a look around. I mean, anyone who's been there to Israel recently, it's absolutely mind-boggling. The trouble is a change that takes place over a long period of time. We tend to adapt to in stages, so we don't really appreciate, what a difference it makes until you go back many years earlier. And have you ever gone back to an old neighborhood? Someone, in fact, I just saw someone today who actually used to live in my neighborhood many years ago. He was just visiting. Actually, was going to the dentist here, and I bumped into him, and he told me, what a difference it's made, what a difference has occurred over the course of the time that he's been away for several years. They put up new apartment buildings, the place has expanded, they beautified the place, and it's amazing the change. The average person living where I live, who has been watching those changes take place in stages, they don't really appreciate what has happened because, that's a change, you get used to it, that's another change, you get used to it. And here we are, in Eretz Israel, that was once a barren land that was dangerous to live in. You couldn't find food, you got malaria. Even when they first Israelis came to Israel, and they had to drain the swamps, and people died from disease and had to deal with the marauders and terrorists of those times. And today, I mean, it's like you just almost everything you could possibly want is already here. You still have to work. There's still concerns. There's still worries. We had rockets attacks just last week. In fact, on Tisha B'Av during our keynotes, all of a sudden we heard a siren go off, and we began to get up to go to a shelter. Boom! They blew up the rocket, went right back, sat on the floor, and continued on with our keynotes. But obviously, we're not. It's not a perfect society yet. But compared to what I was, even since I first came here, was as a single man back in my early days to go to yeshiva, the changes are absolutely phenomenal, and they're still phenomenally changing. I mean, every time I go to Ramat Beit Shemesh, which is just part of the expansion of Beit Shemesh became Ramat Beit Shemesh, and it's like there's a whole new community that goes up every 2 weeks, like literally buildings going up, and it just keeps expanding. It's absolutely remarkable. You look over here, close to where I live, towards Memphis Eretz Tzia, you can see like 6, 7, 8 different cranes, dotting the skyline, building, and the highways have been improved. I can go on and on and on. The technology and the system and everything that's happened over the last 25, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years at breakneck speed. We're there. I mean, what else has to be, changed? What else, the government will take care of itself. When Mashiach comes, the government will take care of itself. We don't have to really worry about that too much, because that is just part of the process leading up to the final moments of exile before Mashiach finally arrives. The only thing really missing, the only thing that's really, dramatically missing from this picture of Geula is the other half of the Jewish people living in the diaspora. That's it. The land has been built. It's developed. There's enough place for everyone to live. There's enough food. There's enough technology. It's all here. And the rest of the problems will begin to disappear after that, because of the fact that we will finally be in the messianic stage era when finally evil is gone from the world. On that day, God's name will be one. He will be one. This week's parsha, we talk about the Shema, right? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Rashi explains, why doesn't, well, you have to ask the question, why doesn't it not just say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Echad? Hear, Israel, God is one. That's all it has to say. Why is it Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad? God, our God, the Lord our God is one, because at this stage of history, he's only one to us, not to the rest of the world yet. They believe in all kinds of different things. But when Mashiach finally comes, he'll be one for everybody. He'll be king over the entire land, the entire world. One component of all of this kind of gets overlooked and swept under the rug a bit. And I think it's important to point out, especially that tonight is, in fact, Tu B'Av, the day of love, so to speak, right, of the Jewish people for each other. We have a mitzvah of love your neighbors yourself. We have several mitzvahs to do with the unity of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael, a raven zealous, every Jew is a guarantor for their fellow Jew. There's famous stories, there's actually quite a few of them, of blood libels that took place. One of them at the turn of the last century, where I was thinking it was Russia, and classic blood libel, where they took the Gemara and they said, you look in the Gemara, and it mentions, it calls the Jewish people Adam, man, right? But it refers to the nations of the world as Umas Ha'olam, nations of the world. Nothing really that, chauvinistic about that whatsoever, but they picked on that. They were looking for a blood libel it's a libel. It's not really based upon anything true, but you're looking for an excuse to persecute Jews. And for some reason they feel they have to have an excuse sometimes, and other times they don't. And they took it to a Russian court and they said, look, you see the Jews, they're biased towards their own people. They disrespect and disregard the rest of the world. And the judge says, well, how do you answer for this? So actually they weren't exactly sure how to answer this in the most, understandable way on behalf of the Jewish community. So they actually wrote, I believe, to the Chazon Ish, and they asked the Chazon Ish how to answer this question. And he answered by saying it's very simple, that if a Jew's hurting in one part of the world, Jews around the world feel it and respond to it and do something about it. They can't ignore it. It's like your body. right? If your elbow hurts, even though you don't feel the pain actually in your toe, your foot, your leg, but it feels it kind of because it's one complete unit. It's very hard for one part of the body to hurt, to ail, and not affect the rest of the body because it's a single unit. So he says, why? That's what the Jewish people are called the Dam, because they exist kind of as a single unit. I don't hold back at the laughing and all the cynicism and all that, but that's what it's supposed to be. Kol Yisrael, Arevim Zelazeh. Every Jew is a guarantor for their fellow Jew. And because of that, we're called the Dam. But the nations of the world, they're so broken apart and separate that one nation can suffer and the other nations don't care. Some will run to their help, some won't, right? Depends upon the situation. They'll go to war against each other. So that's the reason why the Gemara makes this distinction, and it worked. It convinced the judge in the Russian courts, and they got off the hook and for the time being. But this is a very important, part of the Geula picture that has to be understood. So, to begin with, if you look in benching, right, you look in Birchas HaMazon, the grace after meals, the thing that we say a person washes on bread, they have basically a slice of bread, in a certain period of time, between 2 to 4 minutes, you're supposed to have that slice of bread, quickly. Otherwise, you don't have to bench after. But if you're having a bread meal, like a Shabbos, for example, Shabbos, you cut a slice of challah, you eat it, right? And then you have the rest of the meal. And after the meal, we have Birchas HaMazon, the next week's parsha is Rosh Hashanah. And in it, the first paragraph, we're thanking God for the food that He's given to us. We actually mention that He gives it to us b'chein b'chesed v'rachamim. B'chein b'chesed v'rachamim. Now, I think I've mentioned this before in the past, but it's worth hearing again in this context. It's worth hearing again, period, because it's such an important point. And what does it mean? What's chen? What's chesed? What's rachamim? Rachamim is mercy. They're actually reverse, right? They're reverse, right? It's like not only this, but this too. And not only this, but this also. Right, but chen normally means like grace, like something nice about the person. The person finds chen in the eyes of another person. It means they're likable. There's something about them that attracts you to them, not superficially. It can also be superficial to some degree, but usually it's a little bit deeper. Children have a lot of chen. You just want to, pick them up and hold them when they're behaving, right? And that's more like chen. It can be beauty. It can also be physical beauty, but usually the best type of chen is more of a spiritual beauty, a virtue, that a person has or several. What's chesed? Well, we know chesed. Chesed is just kindness, not just kindness, but it means kindness, right? Rachamim, of course, is mercy. So we're thanking God for the grace, lack of better translation for the time being, grace, the kindness, and the mercy. Are they all the same thing? Of course not. What's the difference? The difference basically is that rachamim, mercy, means that you need something and it's not necessarily coming to you. For example, you're hungry, you're starving, you may be close to death, God forbid, and you need food, and someone has it, but it's his food. He doesn't owe you a living at all, nothing. And he worked for it, and he got it legitimately, and you didn't. And he planned, and you didn't. And he could simply keep his food and just watch you wilt away, wither away, and die. Now, it's not the nicest thing in the world to do, especially since it's a mitzvah of love your neighbors yourself, but technically speaking, he could do that. Rachamim means he has mercy on you, or you have mercy on them. You share your food anyhow, because they need it. They need it. Mercy means you're giving someone something that they need that they don't necessarily deserve. If they deserve it, if it's their food, and you're holding on to it, then you're a thief, and maybe, God forbid, even a killer. But if it's your food and they have no relevance to it, and you share it, that's called mercy. Chesed means that I don't necessarily need this thing. I may want it. I like it. I wouldn't mind sharing your sandwich. If you don't share your sandwich with me, I'll wait till I go home and I'll eat something else. I might get a little hungry along the way, but I'm not going to starve to death. I'll survive. But you know something? Sharing your sandwich or your piece of cake would be a nice thing. So a chesed would mean that you're doing something for me or someone else that I don't necessarily need, but it's a nice thing to do. It's sharing. It's a kindness. That's chesed. And what's chen? Chen is above me on all of this. Not only that, but you would be happy, right? You'd be happy with this piece of cake. This cake, the way it is, no problem. and someone says, you know something? Rather than have this piece of cake, I have a nicer piece of cake for you. The one I'm going to give you has icing on it. You like icing? Oh, good. You'll enjoy this piece of cake. But I was happy with the cake without the icing. Yeah, but if you like cake, you'll really like this cake. You're right. I do. This is delicious. It's wonderful. That's chen. So how do we see this? By Hashem. So we see it by Hashem because, believe it or not, even though He created us, right? He made us and made this entire world. He didn't have to feed us. He didn't have to. That's not fair. How can you make us and not feed us? How can you just bring us into existence to live and then die from starvation? What kind of God are you? Well, it wouldn't make a difference. If that's the kind of God He is, it's the kind of God He is. And if that's the ultimate good, it doesn't make a difference if you can't understand it, you can't relate to it. You might complain right to your dying moment, but it doesn't make a difference because if that's what God says is the ultimate good, that's it. What if, for example, that you only live for one day, but in that one day you're able to earn eternity, the world to come? What if? It would be enough. You starved. Okay, listen, during war times, people starved. During it was difficult for people to be able to survive because there was no food, or they couldn't get to it, or it was too dangerous to get to it. I mean, people have gone through very, very difficult, tough times over history. And because of that, right, they might have earned more reward in the world to come because of their self-sacrifice for a higher cause than they might have had they lived an entire lifetime with nonstop food. So what do we know? What do we care? As long as it's good for us ultimately, that's all that counts. But God says, no, you need food, and I'm going to give it to you. So here's your food. Where's my food? Well, it's actually someplace up north in the Arctic, under like 6 feet of ice. You have to fight the whales for it, and maybe a few sharks along the way, right? But it's there. I guarantee you, you go up there, break through the ice if you survive that long, and you'll find the food. So that's rachamim, because the food's there. It's if you get there, you'll be able to eat it and survive. But He doesn't do that. He goes a step better. He says, not only will I give you food, I'll give it to you locally. You won't have to go to the north to go looking. We want to hike up, or take a pleasure cruise all the way to the Arctic Circle just to be able to find your food. I'm going to make it available anywhere that you live. That's a chesed. To give me food, that's rachamim. But to make the food available, accessible, that's a chesed. I don't have to have it, but I certainly want it. It makes my life more convenient, more pleasant. That's chesed. So I go in my backyard. Oh, look, there's the food. And it tastes like tar, right? The Jewish people complain about the man. He's like, oh, we did this man business, falling from Shemayim. Although it could taste like almost anything you want it to taste like. But it looked like man. It's like this white, chalky substance, and that bothered them. It was a test, as we'll see again in next week's parsha. But that's what it would be. If we found tar, not tar itself, but food that kind of smelled like tar and tasted like tar, all the nutrients you need, right? You eat it, cod liver oil, or worse, right? And you could survive on this food. You go into your backyard, you pull off the tree, squeeze it, whatever, prepare it, and you eat it, and it tastes absolutely horrible. But you'd be grateful that horrible food is available in your backyard and not someplace up north under the Arctic Circle. That's a chesed. So then what's the chen? I think you can figure out for yourself, because we see it all over the place. Not only does God make our food accessible, not only first does He give us food, not only does He make our food accessible, but He makes it beautiful too. And it smells nice, and it tastes good, and it looks wonderful. And you pull an orange off a tree, it's like individually wrapped, long before saran wrap came along, and these sandwich bags, and God was already wrapping His pieces of oranges in some type of food substance that kept the juices inside. So when you bit into it, it wasn't messy, but you could taste the juices, and you can almost drink them at the same time. An apple looks wonderful, and you can prepare food, you can spice food, you can make. Look how far we've come from thorns and thistles. Back in the time of Adam Arisha, We have gourmet cooking, gourmet food. I mean, you could spend hundreds of dollars on a single meal for taste that you can't even begin to imagine because God made that possible. That's the chen. So the question is why? Why? I mean, you take it for granted because that's what we want. that's what we're coming. That's our pleasure in life. How could God not do that? It means it's a given that I should have good food. You see in a restaurant, someone doesn't get exactly what they want. They bang on the table. They get angry with the waiter. They scream their head. It's like, "Where's my food?" No, they're paying good money. They want the food that goes along with it. We expect it. Why not? We get something, and our parents make something when we were younger, didn't exactly like. We complained. I want something that I enjoy that tastes good. What are you talking about? It's food, and it's accessible, and it looks pretty decent, and it tastes pretty good too. So you develop a taste. We expect it. Didn't have to be that way. Not at all. Not at all. It would be a different world, and we'd have to get used to it. Maybe some people couldn't, but most people would have to. We adapt. That's one of the things about the human beings that we see all the time. We adapt. I mean, in the Holocaust and in wars and in camps and in all kinds of situations where people had to do just to be able to eat and drink, things that we won't even mention. Because today they would discuss this, but if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. And you adapt just to survive. But God doesn't do that. He gives us incredible. You walk into a makol, into a store, and the vegetables and the colors are just absolutely remarkable and beautiful, and the smell is wonderful, and the taste, and we package things and make it available, even synthesize. But why? Why did God feel compelled to do all of that? Because he says, that's how much I like you. That's how much I care about you. That's how important you are to me. And we don't even know half of it, by the way. That's just the things we see. Those are the things that we pay attention to, we're aware of. But how many things are happening for us, to us, because of us, that we're not even aware of, for our benefit? Like the times we almost got into a car crash, and we either knew it or didn't know it. It might have been that we were completely unaware of it. How close we came to being in a car crash, God forbid. Or another dangerous situation, or a financial situation that could have been a lot worse because Baruch Hu softened for us and made it better and fixed it, whatever, but those are the things we don't see. But the things that we do see, because that's just God's way of saying, I pay attention to such detail. That's one of the reasons why, by the way, that we spend so much time paying attention to detail in building the Mishkan, the tabernacle. 4 times we go over the details of the tabernacle. Am I going to build the tabernacle? Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Where? With what materials? No, you are supposed to be the Mishkan. This is just a dugma. It's an example. It's a prototype of how to build a physical building as a Mishkan. But now apply those principles to you. And the same way that God pays extreme attention. I mean, just recently, a friend of mine who's a doctor, we were discussing, the whole concept of cell division and how a child is formed. And he sent me some educational videos to take a look at, some very well done animations even, about the whole process of cell division inside the body from the very, very beginning on such a microscopic level. And as I'm watching this, I'm like literally feeling the need to explode. The awe that it's welling up. It just reminds me of the Rambam. The Rambam says there's a mitzvah to love and fear God. Hilchos Deos, he brings down in Yer Chazaka. It's this week's parsha. This week's parsha says Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Shem Echad. This is the parsha of the Shema, and Ein Od Milvado. There's none other than God. Big parsha, very important central ideas in this parsha, and it says V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol lebavcha b'chol nafshecha b'chol me'odecha. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your hearts, Yitzhak, Yitzhahara, both of them, right, and all of your life, if you have to, and all of your possessions, which basically means that everything that you do and everything you build and everything you accomplish and everything you think of and everything you enjoy, right, somehow has to turn into an expression of love for Hashem. because he's given it to us as an expression of his love for us. That's the way it works. He's showing us to what an extent you can love somebody, that someone can love you. Such care, paying such attention to the welfare of somebody else. You'll tell me, well, that's God. God, what else is God going to do? He doesn't have a job. He doesn't need a job, right? It's not like he gets bored, right? But what does he do? Instead, he basically, he watches over us. We're his creation. He wants us to be able to live. So therefore, he's constantly, but he doesn't have to do that either. If he wants to, he doesn't, but he wants to. The whole thing could be on autopilot, the whole thing. If he wants to. He didn't. He pays attention. He cares. Why? Because we have a mitzvah of ilach b'derachav, to walk in the ways of God. There's a mitzvah to be like God. As the Ramchal points out, and he says quite clearly, right, that the mitzvah itself basically means that just like God is merciful, you have to be merciful. Just as God is gracious, you have to be gracious, right? And just as he loves you so much in such detail, such care and concern, to the point of chen v'chesed rachamim, right? You have to for somebody else as well. We know it's the basis of Kabbalah Torah. We know it's the basis of receiving Torah. Where do we see this? Because in Parshas Yisro, the Parsha of the giving of the Torah, when God comes down over Mount Sinai and gives the Torah, the verse says that the Jewish people came from Rephidim, and Rephidim is where they met up with Amalek, the nation that's the nemesis and the antithesis of the Jewish people, and blocking Torah. Spoke about him last week in the Gematria of Shema and Baruch Shem Kavod and 240 and all that suffix and doubt, right? That's Amalek, and we came from there, that antithesis of creation, to camp at Mount Sinai, and it says V'yichin tachas ahar, and they camped at the foot of the mountain. And V'yichin is singular. It should say V'yachanu. They camped at the base of the mountain, which prompts Rashi to say that the Jewish people, by the time they got to Har Sinai, they were ki'isha chabalev echad, like a single person with a single heart. Like a single person with a single heart. And that's absolutely remarkable thing. It does happen. For example, we've all experienced it at some point in time during a crisis. During Corona, for example, Corona brought this out tremendously. People were busy with their own lives. Corona came along. Families were suffering. People died. There were issues with food distribution. At the beginning it was very difficult, and people rose to the occasion. They showed concern and care for somebody else, more so than they had previously before. Not that it wasn't inside of them. They just weren't paying attention. They didn't feel the need for it. They thought people were taking care of themselves. But that care, that level of care for somebody else, is so central to God's shita, his way of doing things. It's so part. You can argue and say, well, yeah, but he brought all of God. Put that aside for the time being, because that's not what he wanted to bring. That only happened because of other reasons, because we failed to rise to the occasion in advance. Because take a look, for example, okay? We have a klal. There's a principle in Kabbalah that everything that happens to the Jewish people for bad, negatively, whatever it is, whatever the main focus is, it's always the flip side of what God was giving the Jewish people for good. He puts an energy into the world to allow us to be successful. He gives us a koyach. He puts in the world at a certain time. If we need to accomplish a certain task, personally, nationally, doesn't make a difference, he will give us extra help, siyata d'shmaya, to be successful if it's a good thing to do. So the Vilna Gaon, by the end of the 1700s, the early 1800s, was already sending his Talmidim, his students there to Israel. He began to focus as of 1740, I believe it was, when he was 20 years of age, the year 5500, the Jewish year, because the Zohar says that's the beginning of the Erev Shabbos of history. So therefore he realizes that this is the final generation, the Zman Geula. So he began to focus on Kibbutz Galios, the ingathering of the exiles to Eretz Israel, which was a very hard thing to sell at that stage of history. But he sent his students, and they built up, and here we are today, the end of his foresight. And the Baal Shem Tov as well, and other Rabbanim, other Gedolim, and other people who sacrificed themselves over the course of hundreds of years. And here we are, the end result of all that. It's absolutely remarkable what they began and how far it's gone and how much help we've had from Hashem to make it successful. But things slowed down. Even in the 1800s, I've read how even secular Jews saw that anti-Semitism was making it impossible to remain in Europe. This is before Hitler was even around. They just saw that anti-Semitism in Europe is very intense, and they began to call for mass aliyah in the 1800s. There's Israel. And people balked. It's hard. It's very hard. Just like it's hard today to leave America or Canada, even though there are so many warning signs that history is going down that same path. Come on. There's so many warning signs. You can balk at them, and you can naysay them, but they're there. Anybody who wants to pay attention. But, it's hard to uproot and pick up and to move. There's Israel. It's a foreign country. It's the Middle East. You're so comfortable. You weren't intellectually, mentally, emotionally prepared for this. I understand. But it doesn't change the situation. It didn't change it in Europe. Not then, not hundreds of years before that, not going back to Roman times or Babylonia. I mean, just look at the prophecies of Yirmiyahu. We read Yirmiyahu on Tisha B'Av and the Shabbos before and Shabbos Chazon, and how he warned the Jewish people. He told them the signs, the warnings. He told them, and they disregarded them. They chose instead to listen to false prophets who said, "Nah, don't listen to Yirmiyahu. It's okay. It'll be fine." And they're completely and destructively wrong. But that's what people do. They don't want to change. When they want to maintain a status quo that's comfortable but not right. I have examples of it all through history. But the main point is that this idea of caring for one another, of having respect for one another, it's hard. I'll be the first person to admit I battle this all the time. It's very easy to be critical and to be accusing and to see things you don't like, and but at least a little voice inside my head comes back and says, "Is that what you should be doing?" Right? And if it's not my voice, it's my wife's voice reminding me that I should be thinking along different lines. It's hard. We have negiyas, we have biases, we have personality things, that make us uncomfortable with some things that other people have no problem with. But I just want to take a moment to reflect, a few moments to reflect on changes that have taken place over the last couple of decades that I think are indicative of the direction that society has gone, Jewish society has gone, because I'm talking about living in Eretz Israel, where I am, I see it all over the place, and the world in general. And you find this happens, historically, there's a major war and everyone becomes conservative and they become less selfish. They become more selfless. That's what war will do to people. It brings us back down to earth. It makes us value the things that count the most. That's what war does. With all the destruction and deadliness of war, it is a great teacher about the value of life. It's just unfortunate that we have to learn it through war. But then as time goes on, and we forget the war, and new generations are born, and technology advances, life becomes more comfortable, and affluence starts to spread, then we start to wear down, and we start to lose that sensitivity and become less selfless and more selfish. So this is going to sound like nitpicking, but it's not really. It's indicative of an attitude. For example, 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, but at least 20 years ago, did anybody imagine parking in a parking spot in the wrong direction? It's not the way we're supposed to park, right? The cars go this direction. Well, I was told the law is, and the law still is, right, that you park in the same direction that the traffic's supposed to flow. First of all, that's the way you get out easier. It's safer, right? You're facing that direction, right? Then you have to turn around and look for cars in both directions. I know because I personally experienced this. Because we have this thing called City Car in Telstone and different places around the country. So, rent a car for hours or for Shabbos, just book it, go in, rent it, right? And several times I've gone to get the car, and the last person who drove the car left the car parked in the wrong direction. And it was far more nerve-wracking to pull out into the traffic, onto the street, and turn it around because I had to take into account traffic from two different directions. He didn't think about me. Of the next person. I wouldn't do that because I'm older. I come from an age we didn't do things like that. Even just the way people drive, the risks that they take. is parking problems all over the place. And there's no question that it's an issue. Why should I not be able to park my car? I have a car. He parked his car. Okay, he got there first. But I have a car too, so I should be able to park. But where does it come into the idea that I can park my car anywhere I want to because that's convenient? On a sidewalk blocking other people. I know a person who has to, an elderly person who has to drive one of these motorized cars for people who can't walk up and down the hill, and their vehicle gets blocked because somebody is parking where pedestrians are supposed to go because they couldn't find a parking spot right next to where they wanted to go, or they didn't want to walk 2-3 blocks like we would have done in the past because that's what you did. That's the situation. Or in a Makolet, or just walking down the street and you see something that might be an obstacle for somebody else, may hurt them if they don't see it. And rather than move it out of the way, as the halacha is, because you have to always look out, there's no stumbling block for your fellow man, it's not my problem. Small examples, but you'll find that they show up in different places all over the place. This is the society that we live in today. It's become a very, very large society, very competitive society. You'll find it all the time where affluence increases, where people have more. So not everyone is able to get the more, others do for different reasons. It creates jealousy, it creates disregard for one another. But the most dangerous part of that is, aside from the fact it's not healthy for society as a whole, the most dangerous part is that God looks down and says, that's not the way I act. That's not the way I treat you. That's not the way I feel about him or that person. Moshe Rabbeinu is told to go talk to the rock. There's no water. Miriam died. Parshas Chukas. They're worried once again. It's a desert. You need water for all your needs, not just drinking, but washing, bathing the kids. Mikvah, everything, it's all the same well for the whole camp, and it dries up, and they don't know why. They figure out it has to do with Miriam after because she died at the same time. So God says, no problem. Go talk to the rock. Go bring water. The point that the water came because of Miriam, that's been made. Now let's bring the water back. And then Kabbalah explains the whole mechanism to do this and why it's important that Moshe does it with his, by talking to the rock. And instead, Moshe gets angry. And again, there are details being left out. It's a very complex story. But Moshe gets angry. At the end of this, the main point is the overall picture, the big picture here is that Moshe gets angry. And because he does talk to the rock, by the way, he talks to the rock nicely and says, please bring forth water, like God told us to ask you to do. And he does it, but the water doesn't come. So he talks a second time, and the water doesn't come. So he hits the rock that one time, and blood starts to come out. And he hits the rock a second, and finally the water comes flowing out. And we're all going, wow, what a miracle. And the people are going, water, 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 fantastic, what a miracle. And then God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? He says, you're not going to Eretz Yisrael. Why not? Because you didn't sanctify my name. By hitting the rock twice, not just once, but twice, you failed to sanctify my name. Now we know that God already told Moshe back in Mitzrayim he's not going to Israel, but this becomes like the reason, put it all together, larger picture. But the starting point was that Moshe got angry. He says to them, Morim. He calls them rebellers. Now, I would for sure do the same thing. I would have been angry. I get angry at some lesser things. I mean, these people are rebelling. They're complaining, they're fetching against God once again. And Moshe is constantly having to get them out of trouble. And it's happening all over again. So he gets angry. And he says, rebellers. And we would be fine with that. But God says, Moshe, why'd you get angry? Why'd you get angry? When you get angry, people think that I'm angry, and I'm not angry. So you're getting angry on my behalf, but I'm not angry. So therefore, it's on your behalf, and that's a problem. And that sets up the whole scenario in the end that causes Moshe Rabbeinu to make the mistake to not be Mashiach. That's why in this week's Parsha, he says, because of you, the Eschanar, I pleaded with Hashem. Chazal point out 515 times Moshe asked. It's the gematria of the Eschanar. And if he had asked one more time, he was going into Eretz Yisrael. One more time, he was going to defeat the decree against him and go to Eretz Yisrael. And just as he opened his mouth to do that, God said, whoa, wait a second. Let me tell you what's going to happen if you do that. You will go into Israel, yes. You will be Mashiach, yes. You will build the Beis Hamikdash where it's supposed to be, because that's what Mashiach does. But once Mashiach builds the Beis Hamikdash, it can't be destroyed. But the Jewish people, they're not on the level yet where they're not going to be destroyed. They're going to make mistakes. So if I can't destroy the Beis Hamikdash, stone and wood and all that, then I'm going to destroy them. So what's it going to be, Moshe? Stay at it and let someone else put the Beis Hamikdash that can be destroyed so they can survive, or go in and be the last one standing, because everyone else got destroyed instead of the Beis Hamikdash you built. So Moshe stopped. He says, because of you. I could have personally overcome this decree, but because of you, I couldn't. To save your skin, I could not go in. But the starting point of this whole thing was the fact that Moshe got angry. God, I didn't get angry. I understand where they're coming from. I understood, even though it's the air of Rav, the mixed multitude, but I sensed, there are times when I get angry. There's times when they make mistakes they shouldn't make, and I express an anger, but not here, not this time. And you should have checked with me first, because that would have changed the whole scenario. We want Mashiach to come. We want the Gula. We want the evil to stop. There's enough of it in the world as it is right now. We want the situation. We want poverty to end. We want the sicknesses to end. There's so much we want. If we're blessed, Baruch Hashem, to have good news in our lives and things are going smooth for the time being, wonderful. But that's not the whole nation. And it doesn't take very much to spill over into the rest of the nation. We watched that in the Holocaust. It happened in stages. The less protected got affected first. It eventually affected everybody. We all got pulled into it. And as I've started to mention, right, about the Holocaust, I got sidetracked there for a second, that all the energy that God puts into the world that ends up doing bad to us was supposed to be good. And when you focus on main things, main symbols of the Holocaust, concentration camps, the removal of all of our religious, aspects, the clothing, the hair, the payas, the beards, everything, right? There was a tremendous achdus that happened because of the Holocaust, imposed upon us, forced upon us. That's not what's supposed to happen. God put an energy into the world in the 1930s and 1920s for kibbutz galius, to ingather the Jews to Eretz Israel. We didn't use it. We balked. We had warnings. We ignored them. So instead, we were gathered in all right, but not to Eretz Israel, from the four corners of Europe to concentration camps. He put a koyach of achdus in the world, of unification of the Jewish people, unity and love into the world for the sake of helping us work together to accomplish this amazing task that requires the help of the entire nation. We didn't use it. We fought instead. So we got that achdus imposed upon us from the outside. Everyone got numbers. Because in Parshas B'Midbar, God says, you're all my sheep, that I love. I count you. Like a person counts their money, I count the Jews. And I would have counted you in a nicer way, a much healthier, friendlier, loving way. But you balked. You didn't rise to the occasion. So instead, that energy got used. I didn't do it. The energy was in the world for good. It got used for bad instead. Tu B'Av, here we are, right? Tonight, the 15th of Av. It's a good time to turn things around. It's a good time to start thinking about other people more. You might already think, but more than just your family, more than just your neighbors, more than just your community. Open up the heart. Open it, right? Start caring on a much larger scale. Pay attention to the details of other people, not just rachamim, but chesed and chen too. Think about what you're doing over here. If I park over here and I block the view of someone coming out, am I endangering their lives by doing this? Am I endangering anybody by doing this? Then I shouldn't park here. Then I shouldn't walk here. I shouldn't do this thing. If in any way that my actions that might make my life more convenient is going to make someone else's life less convenient, or even worse, chas v'shalom, you shouldn't do it. Because that's not how God treats us. And unless we want that to change, we have to change it with ourselves first. When we do that, B'ezras Hashem, we'll be zeicha, we'll merit to know the unification of Klal Yisrael, or really Klal Yisrael, and be able to bring Mashiach and Geula without any more suffering. Anybody there?